look at. Thank you for coming. I really did not suspect that it was going to be quite so much not visiting friends and neighbors. I've even got the upstairs neighbors. They're probably wanting to know when I'm going to get back and water the garden, because that's what they look at out their windows. So anyway, thank you for coming. I'm really grateful to you, because you're a group of people who know a very great deal about an awful lot of subjects. So I do hope that you'll feel at the end of the time that hi, how are you? I didn't even see you get in. I hope you'll have some thoughts about why I find it such an absolutely fascinating topic. And there's the question: are we running out of water, or just not running fast enough to get it right? And of course I don't answer the question. Nobody ever answers their own philosophical questions. But, how Canada contributes. Gordon gave you a list of the kind of things I'm doing, and from that you will know that I haven't turned into a hydrologist, an agrologist, an agronomist, geologist. I haven't turned into any of those things. My angle of vision on water is policy. And since that's where I met most of you in my life, as we struggled together with the policy aspects of a number of things, you won't be too surprised with that. And of course, CIC is all about policy. So let's go. Okay, the world. And this is a very interesting map. This isn't a lecture that has all sorts of stuff written down on the PowerPoint. I want to give you some images so that when you go home, you'll have these images and you'll think, aha, yes, I remember this one. This one is is a good one, because, here we are up here, blue and comfortable. That is part of a good fortune. It also makes us not very good water managers, because we are all absolutely convinced that we are blue and really comfortable. You can see, I think the period of time here is about a 30-year period of time, and you can see what's happening without even having to be told which is moderate, which is severe, which is all the rest of it. You can tell that the world is getting a great deal more uncomfortable for a great deal of the people that live in it. And moving from yellow to red is not a good thing to be doing. I'm not sure what color they'll use for beyond red, because some countries are moving right into a very desperate water shortage. But you can see that there's some interesting things in there. This is still very rainy. Latin America is still rainy. Now they're both moving into a little bit drier. This is probably the latest reports from ICCP, from the climate change people. I think this part is really going to stay fairly green. So it's constantly changing, the forecast, as the ICCP report comes in. But you can see that the world has a very differentiated supply of water. Now, we're adding 2 billion more people to the planet in the next several decades. And you can already see, you know exactly where that 2 billion is going to be added, because it's not going to be added in the northern part, which already is comfortably blue and green. It's going to be added in the places where we've already got real water stress. And when you start to overlay that with what we do with water, you begin to see what the real problems are and how they arise. Okay. This is where, this is the whole story of water. 97.5% is oceans. We can use it, but it takes a lot of energy. And if you use the energy, you're contributing to greenhouse gases. So there may come a day when we are able to join up those technologies, but basically 97.5% is salt. Out of that, so 2.5% is fresh water. In that 2.5%, glaciers are 70% of the 2.5%. So you're starting to get a very small amount of water available. Groundwater is 30, that's a big number, remember that one. Permafrost, 0.8. But all of the water that we think of as our water only comes down to 0.4% of 0.2-0.5% of that number up there. And that is fresh water, soil moisture, atmosphere, wetlands, rivers, vegetation. The one that fascinates me is rivers. Only 1.5% of the 0.4%. I always think of rivers as being the kind of the main act in terms of water. Maybe because I grew up, beside a river. Howie, how are you? Nice to see you. And I always thought of rivers as being the main act. And it really, rivers are a very small part of the available water. Find a comfortable chair, John. Those are probably more comfortable over there. Are those okay? You good? Okay, good. So, and basically we use it for two things, water, agriculture and everything else. Because about 75 or 80% of the water that we use all goes to agriculture and food. You consume a number of tons of water every month, and that's really all in food because it takes so much water to make the food that we eat. We're going to come back to that, but agriculture takes up 68%, and in the consumptive use, well, we're not going to go into that today. But anyway, that gives you a picture of water where it is and where it isn't, and you know how that water gets divided and how it gets used. Now, what's the problem? Okay, here's the problem. That's not the problem. No, that's not, okay. All right, everyone says that. But I've got a lot of these everyone says that. Because, you know, I like to bring in some of the common myths about water too. Everybody says we're running out of water. Well, we're not running out of water. We've got the same amount of water as Julius Caesar and the dinosaurs. That's supposed to be a dinosaur. It's not the nicest one I could find. But you like my dinosaur? Oh, I'm glad you like my dinosaur. But we've got the same amount of water as the planet has always had. It's how we're using it and how it's distributed and how the demand is increasing in the places it's distributed that is causing the problem. But we've got hypothetically the same water, but if your water goes up, falls down, and 70% of it turns into a glacier, clearly this is not adding very much to the people that are trying desperately to get water out of African lakes and out of rivers. So, and the world water demand is projected to grow by 55% by 2050. This is a complex chart, but really not very. This is about the world that we've lived in until now. This is the OECD, the wealthy countries of the world. And we've used less than half, as we got more developed, we've used less than half for irrigated crops. Come on in. Hello. Hi, come on in. Not at all, fine, Jeff. So half for irrigated water, you know, a little bit for livestock, a little bit for domestic, and a little bit for electricity. That was the pattern that we all grew up in terms of our water use. But look what is happening as the world moves on. Here we've got the whole world. There's the BRICS, including China and India. But look at the 2050 projection, way down below half for agriculture. We've got to talk about how that's going to be achievable. This part is domestic. This part is livestock. And look at that, electricity. The energy bill goes up and up and up and up. So when we talk about adding another 2 billion people to the planet, first of all, those people are going to want food. Secondly, those people are going to be more prosperous than the generations before. And when people get more prosperous, what do they want more of? Gadgets. I'm talking about, I'm still on food. Stuff too, yeah. Stuff too. But yeah, meat, protein, things like that. And it takes 9 times the amount of water to make a kilogram of protein as it does to make a kilogram of wheat or rice. So therefore, the minute that you move into, as China has moved into the pork economy or the chicken economy, their water bill goes way, way, way up. And so therefore you start to see why that map that we were looking at has been getting yellower and yellower and redder, because with prosperity comes greater use of water. What does that mean? It means that when the river first appears, there's more and more people taking irrigation off the top. It means there's more people pulling things out of it. There's more people pulling out of the groundwater so they can raise crops. When we look at the crops that we're raising, we now raise more crops, which are called feed and fodder, than the cereals to eat. In other words, we're raising more cereals to feed animals that we eat than we are raising the cereals for ourselves. Add another 2 billion people and those numbers go tumbling upwards, and the water is very problematic for where the water is going to come from. So the water demand is projected to grow, and as I say, it's going to grow in all sides of the world, including that uncomfortable place over there. So you look at the red is extremely water stressed already, and the orange is, serious water stress. You add the fact that this is where the major population increase is going to come of those 2 billion. Africa will be 4 billion by the time it finishes growing by current population statistics. And there is where you've got the huge water problems. And of course, that's where you're living. Now, I want to tell you another thing why this is an interesting map. It was requested by somebody named Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. Because up until that time, water was something that governments wrung their hands over, tried to deliver it in development assistance programs, worried about the 240 shared waterways around the world, looked at places where there was conflicts and wondered if water would get into it. She was the first one to ask the Joint Intelligence Unit to put together a whole appreciation of what the changing water availability, and she's talking about the crossover between that map and those charts going up, what this is going to mean to U.S. foreign policy and the way it conducts its foreign policy. And if you're ever interested in it, it's a wonderful report. It's freely available, and it basically says this is going to have a serious effect because a lot of the countries that the United States thinks of as its dependable allies are not going to be very dependable because they're going to be very much preoccupied with problems related to water within their own countries, water disputes with the neighborhood, serious problems like forest fires, all of the things that are happening as a result of climate variability and running out of water. So they did a whole map of the countries that would become less and less reliable allies to the United States, not because their foreign policy was changing, but because their actual ability to carry out their own policies was really will be in the future even more seriously prejudiced by what is happening. So I bless Hillary Clinton for doing that. It's a very interesting study, freely available. Okay, so we got up to electricity. The history of humankind is a history of the search for more energy, and you need water for energy, which we never even thought of when we had so much water and so little population. But whether it's for ethanol, hydrogen, extracting and refining of the oils and gases, hydropower, the thermoelectric cooling on the thermal, we need water to make energy. Conversely, you don't get very far with water unless you've got a lot of energy to transmit it. So it's a symbiotic relation. You need water to make sure that you have energy, and this has been one of the great debates in the oil sands is, how much water are they using? What are they doing with it? It's a huge debate in fracking. Sort of what do you do with the water after, and then if you put it back in the ground, we know now what it does. It causes earthquakes, but they're only very little ones, Nothing you really need to worry about. And then it's the same thing for if you want water, you've got to have lots of electricity to move it around. And when I say lots, I really mean lots. The state of California, 27% of the electricity bill of the government of California is pushing water around, pumping it from place to place, bringing it back, pumping it someplace else, cleaning it up, and taking it somewhere else. So water is a very energy-intensive business. Energy is a very water-intensive business. So those two are very much symbiotic. So this is the most important chart you're going to see. It's about the balance, because while countries are going to make it through the next decades by trying to balance how much they want in terms of water use for food, water use for the water in towns, energy, and the relationship between them. Food and energy are linked by biofuels, by the fact that all fertilizers are made with energy, by the fact that agriculture can sequester carbon, that food supply chains lead to carbon, etc., etc. Agriculture and water have a very clear relationship, but people don't think about agriculture's exports as being exported water. And as things get tougher on the waterfront, there is pressure within countries not to export. It's very interesting that when Australia had its big dry several years ago, they kept exporting wheat to China. And that was a very deliberate decision, but a lot of people within Australia were complaining about it. And the Australian government said, look, when this is over, which it will be someday, we want to still be in the business of wheat farming, and we want to still be seen as a reliable exporter to China. And so therefore we've got to protect those goods too, even if we have to cut down the amount of water we put in our glass. So I mean, this is the kind of trade-off that is now becoming very common. Energy and water, large volumes of water required to extract, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in a country like Canada, you can imagine that this gets decided by some studies, some looks, some cabinet papers. We hope some serious discussion around the cabinet table, some commissions, etc. How do you think it gets decided in a lot of the countries in the world where there's absolutely no representative forms of government at all?
Fights, squabbles, wars.
Fights, squabbles, wars, but who ends up on the top? Who ends up getting the water?
People with the money.
People with the wealth, that's right. Mark Twain said, you know, money flows uphill, it moves towards power. And you know, so part of the problem of this is that the world is very, very badly equipped in terms of governance to try and work through what the best allocation is for the water that is flowing through their country. And some countries have a river flowing in over here, going to another country, another river coming in from another country, going here, making a lake. You need different disciplines, and you need different governance, and you need different regimes for all of those. And most countries are really not very well prepared at all of the countries of Africa. I mean, even Latin America, you sit and talk to the Argentinians, and they've been at it forever, and they're still doing it absolutely abominably. So it's a very tough thing to do, to manage water, because once you give water license to a plantation or to a group, to a group of agriculturalists, guess what? They don't want to give it back. And we also, to encourage immigration to the West, to Latin America, they encouraged it by giving volumetric licenses of water. Now, you know what that means? Okay, if you're volumetric, you get the same amount no matter what. You have to turn those into percentage amounts, but guess what? That is not a welcome thought at all. And the licenses in Alberta are volumetric. So therefore, the farmers there have a contract with some level of government which allows them a quantity of water, not the percentage, not a percentage of the water that's flowing through. So that's another place to look for fights and arguments in the future, is whether water is set out in either volumetric or in percentage terms. But that is going to be what we talk about, argue about, and live with for the next years. There's another big stream out of sight. 2 million tons of waste, estimated to equal 2 or more billion tons of wastewater, are discharged daily into rivers and seas. The main thing wrong with this, other than it making, as Inga will tell you, the rivers of India smell absolutely abominable, is that you can't use water that is so heavily polluted for any other use. You have to then start cleaning it up, and cleaning it up takes energy, and energy creates greenhouse gas all over again. So you're back into that circle again. So we treat our wastewater very badly. All sorts of countries, and 80% of Asia does not treat their water. They just simply return it to nature, and so therefore, luckily they're surrounded by a lot of oceans. It isn't lucky for the oceans, but it's lucky for the people that live on land. So it's a serious, serious problem, because it subtracts from the amount that would otherwise be available, and it makes rivers unusable unless they've been cleaned. But you can clean them, and then you can use them, and when you do, you get a benefit, because when you and I eat a carrot, we get beta-carotene, we get phosphorus, we get vitamin A, I think, and all the rest of it, and that's still there as that transits through our bodies and then transits into sewage. So therefore, if we treat that properly, we can retrieve nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all of these things that at the moment we're buying as fertilizer, and we could then have them available for fertilizer. They are available now in sewage sludge, but we're all terribly allergic to using it. So a couple of tasks that have to be done there is, first of all, getting the processes better and getting people accustomed to the idea that just as those who say, oh, I could never use drinking water, but they go to London and have a perfectly lovely time in a city that uses every drop of water 7 times by the time it gets from Oxford to London, but it's always cleaned. But, you know, sewage can be cleaned too. Anything can be cleaned. It just depends on how much energy you really want to use. So wastewater is a real problem. We've got some interesting things. We've got the Falls Creek development down here where some of the waste is being used to create energy. It's not being used onward. They're not saving the water yet, but they are using it to create energy. Rotterdam, Stockholm, others, all their municipal buses are run on the methane from human sewage waste. You can create methane out of this very easily, and it powers the buses. And then you've got the sludge left over, and you use that on agriculture, and then you've got water, and you clean the water, and you've got more water in your supply. Takes energy. So you can do these things, and it does, so that, you know, there's those that have some water, like in cities, can keep on using it and using it and using it, but it will take some energy to do it. So, are you forgetting about us? I noticed that in the brochure about advertising this, the part of water that, as always, gets talked about is drinking water and hand washing. Are you forgetting about us? Well, no, I'm not. But frankly, there's enough water to solve the drinking water needs of the whole world easily. 1% aggregate use in reduction. If you reduce the agricultural use in every country by 1%, you'd have more than enough for everybody to drink. The problem here is policy. No country likes its poor people, whether it's Canadians with 300 boil water advisories all over the north, or the 1.2 billion people around the world that don't have clean water because it just isn't a budgetary priority. Development assistance goes in here and doesn't do a terribly good job, but it's got awfully good people trying to. But this is a budget and policy issue. This is not one of the real mysteries of water. And when people say, you know, sort of, this is terrible, we won't have any water to drink, we'll always have water to drink. That is absolutely not the issue. The issue is whether we will have water for energy and whether we will have water for food, and who will get the most of it and who will make the decisions about it. So we're not forgetting about the poor, but in fact, a lovely thought. Somebody once told me that the Saguenay River in Quebec produces enough water per year to provide all the drinking water that everybody in the world needs. Now, this is a completely useless statistic, in fact, but I love the idea that one Canadian river, you know, that actually is, you know, provided all the drinking water that we need in the entire world. It gives you an idea of the fact that the problem is not the water availability. The problem is how much attention is given by cities, who's making money out of it, and why the poor in cities are really not taken care of. I got a vivid answer to this once when I was in Kenya, in Nairobi, and you know, there's big slums outside, and there's a municipal area inside which is nicely served, and I asked whether they were thinking of extending the municipal pipes and the systems to Kibera and to the other settlements around, and he gave me the answer which I came quickly to understand is given to all foreign dignitaries. Oh yes, this is absolutely in the current, but you know, in the close-up budget planning and all the rest of it. And then somebody, when we were walking out to my car, said, you know, Kibera's pretty well served, so are the rest of them. There's great big trucks go around every night and sell them water. And I said, oh? And he said, guess who owns those trucks? Mr. Minister. So he has every interest in serving the poor of Kibera with municipal water, not. So, and there's too many deals that are really just like that around the world. So, yeah, so corruption is the big one. Transparency International, has been run by our friend Huguette Lebel for quite a long time, estimates that about 35% of the cost of water to people around the world disappears in corruption. So it's a big one. So they all say Canada has so much water. Really? Where? The myth of water abundance in our comfortable blue place, it makes for kind of a blind man's bluff about water. We are luckier, but we're not that much better off. First of all of our rivers flow north. Who's ever seen the Mackenzie River here? 3, 2, yeah, well, I mean, that's got a large part of the water stock. We've never even seen it. You can't measure water by water is a flow, not a stock. Yeah, the stock is there, it's the flow that you use. So therefore what you measure is really the amount that comes down in the rain and then flows. That's the usable part. Canada is behind Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, USA, and China in terms of the flow of water. The confounding factor is, of course, the Great Lakes, but the Great Lakes are a fossil deposit. They were deposited by the glaciers. If you use too much of them, they don't come back because there's a very definite amount every year that the Great Lakes can stand to yield for use, but the rain that falls into it and the rivers that flow into it are not such that this is a very large number. And so therefore, there's very careful treaties worked out between the governors of the southern states and the northern premiers of the Alberta, Manitoba, etc., to how much can be used. And the deal is that cities can take it out, but they have to give it back. They're allowed to not give back 20%. And of course, it has to be cleaned. So we're back to clean energy, greenhouse gases, but we're trading greenhouse gases to clean up the water that goes back in the Great Lakes. But everybody says the water of Canada, and they're counting the Great Lakes, or a large part of the Great Lakes, but the Great Lakes aren't usable to us. At least they're usable, but then it'd be a one-time thing. It's like Iran is now thinking the Caspian Sea would be a nice place to drain. You know, it would be exactly the same thing because, you know, the Caspian Sea will not come back like the Aral Sea. Yeah. So the Great Lakes, prairie rivers, they're X% glacier fed. So therefore, as the glaciers go in the west, some percent of the flow across Saskatchewan, Manitoba will go. Alberta is already making noises about, well, those were just informal agreements anyway, and Manitoba and Saskatchewan are saying, no, these are sacred concordances. It really is going to make quite a bit of difference to those to the South Saskatchewan and North Saskatchewan, the Big Bend rivers, if they don't have that flow of water coming in from the glaciers. It's not the end, but it will certainly reduce them a great amount. So, is it really, are we really got so much water? 2 years of drought, forest fires, snow melt down. CBC was saying when I walked out the door, lowest snowpack in how many years? You heard the same broadcast as I did. So we are luckier, but we're much less better off than we would like to tell ourselves. And on the quality side of things, we are disgraceful. And if it wasn't for the fact that we've got so much quantity, we would be much better, I'm sure, about quality. Phosphorus causes algal blooms. Lake Winnipeg turns into a blue-green skating rink, except you can't skate on it. We blame the Americans for that, but they're not totally at fault because all those rivers that come across are also carrying leftover fertilizer. Alberta has 5 million cows with no known toilet facilities for them. You want to make money? Do diapers for cows. Tar sands, lead, arsenic, mercury, 28 other metals are in the mix there. They're cleaned out, but there's 200 plus boil water advisories in First Nations reserves in the eastern industrial rivers. At one point, the most famous one was in Cleveland, the Cuyahoga River, and it burned. And they made a song about it. You know, God can't make the river burn. But they've cleaned it up, and they've cleaned up a lot of them. So how about another? They all say. Well, they all say the USA will be coming for our water anyway. So therefore, it really doesn't matter whether we take care of it or not because they're going to come and get it. And the second last Canadian ambassador in Washington said, oh yes, any day we're going to have to start serious talks with the United States about water. I thought, I wonder what they're going to talk about. It's a common Canadian myth that the Americans are coming for our water. A friend of mine from Oregon, who is an expert on the history of conflicts over water, was coming up from across the border, and the guy said, what are you going to do here? And he says, I'm coming to talk about water. And he said, you can't have ours. But the Americans have a lot of alternatives. Some of them are new. They've got the Klamath and the Columbia rivers, which are, who's seen the Columbia and the Klamath rivers? More people than the Mackenzie. Those are big rivers. I mean, if you took 10% of the flow of those at the mouth, you'd have huge amounts of water, even though you'd have to face Oregonians who feel very strongly about these things. But there's two very big rivers there. Desalination plants, there's now 19,000 of them in the world. And some of them are absolutely huge, the ones in Perth, Sydney, Melbourne are particularly big, but there's 2 huge ones going in the United States. Guess what they need to make them run? Energy. You got it, exactly. So we will be converting water, salt water, into fresh water, but the cost will be greenhouse gases again. But the United States, you know, they put in terms of drinking water and stuff, they're going to have more than enough with all of the desal plants. Conserving water, getting out of some agriculture. It's not cheap, because it's not cheap to move water around. Beijing is moving a little bit of water from one of the upper tributaries of the Yangtze up to Beijing city limits. This is the pipe that they're moving it in. I like this picture because it makes me look very small. And I like anything that makes me look very small. So you can see me hit the pipe, and that is the size of pipe that it takes to fill some of the needs of Beijing, drinking water needs of Beijing. So this is not something cheap. This is not something that you do with the gas, with a pipeline, which is the size of a gas or an oil pipeline. This is an entirely different kettle of fish. So, you know, are the Americans really coming to take it? Well, you know, there was a turnaround in the Chicago corridor, so one of the rivers does now flow to the Mississippi, but that was an awfully long time ago. And I think that the states around the Great Lakes are our main protection from really ridiculous behavior there. But I do not know. I mean, I'm always told that they're going to come any day. So, but speaking of the U.S., water consumption per person is less than us. We're up there with Kuwait. We're the 2nd largest consumer per person per day in the world, not to be proud of. Theirs are going down in the United States. The EPA takes good care of rivers. Who takes care of our rivers? Does anybody know whether they're a federal or provincial responsibility?
It's up to crabs.
Cross borders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, we like to think the Americans don't do these things as well as we do, which is not the case. There's lots of great examples in the United States too. Lawns to laundry. This one is a reference to a good friend of mine named Patricia Milroy, and she was the water commissioner for Las Vegas, and a very feisty lady. And she did an exploration of where Las Vegas was using a whole bunch of water. And she discovered that the laundries of the hotels were a huge source. So she says, close them all down. She opened she had a municipal laundry opened, and I'm making this part up now, you know, from 9 to 10:30, all the Marriott sheets, towels, and pillowcases came. They got washed, they came out, they were dried. The hot water was clean, but it stayed hot. What was it used? So less energy, and the phosphates stayed in the water so that you didn't have to keep adding more phosphates. And then came the Hilton, and then came the this, and then came the that, and all the rest of it. So, and it cut the water use in the city down by an astronomical amount. She offered commercially to buy square feet of lawn for $3.47, as I remember. And if somebody had a big lawn, they could make a little profit. They all thought she was going to go do it by force anyway, so they were probably right, so they might as well get paid for it. And they have lawn police, and they go around, and if anybody's growing lawn that's been paid to have their lawn up. So, you know, you can, if you're determined enough, you can use water. They get their water from the Colorado River, so you can, that's enough said. Okay, everyone says that we can really help the world a lot. Well, in water. First of all, we give virtually 100% of our water to water and sanitation. We used to do hydro dams, but we don't do infrastructure much anymore. We're the 2nd largest per person water user, so therefore if somebody was looking for a country that had really cut back on water use, we probably wouldn't be the first one on their list. Where are we in the lead in water? We used to be in the lead in geological services and in a lot of areas that were very good. Now we have some interesting private sector providers, but they can't be used in Canada because after the Walkerton disaster, the dicta was that nothing could be installed in Canadian water systems that hadn't been safely used for X years in 2 other places. Now this really encourages innovation, because if you innovate and come up with a new product, how on earth are you ever going to test it if your own country won't use it? Now the Dutch water boards are full of innovation. You know, they try it all the time, and as a result, there's a lot of Dutch patents out there. The Dutch are making money hand over fist about water, and you know, it's not just dikes and things. So, Canadian governance, some rough indictments. One of the weakest government frameworks in the developed world, says Karen Backer out at UBC. No countrywide drinking water standards. Don't adequately integrate the hydrological cycle, i.e. where it all goes and fits together. Lots of different regimes and standards. We've got 17 federal departments that do something about water, and then provincial, and then municipal, and then First Nations. So by the time you put all of that together, it gets very complicated. EU, Australia, US are much more standardized than Canada. It increases the complexity of doing business in Canada, and much duplication of effort. So, we're not good at any better at that than we are at running our health system. We just like them both. If governance is the issue, do you look to Canada? Well, for water management, the world did, but that was then. We need to greatly improve monitoring, data collection, etc. And maybe I thought as I filled out my customs or my census form yesterday, well, maybe we'll go back to monitoring and doing some of the important things there. Improved forecasting, contamination of aquifers. BC government is starting, that's its law. The one that came in 4 years ago is about groundwater. It's about finding how much there is, what state it's in, what the quality is, what the quantity is, so it's starting. If innovation is the issue, do you look to Canada? Well, we're not really into the circular economy yet, which a lot of countries are. When they build something, they know exactly where all the components are going to go after use. Reuse, clean, repurpose resources, including water. We're not really there, but we have some good places like EPCOR, which is the Edmonton Water Facility, and as I mentioned, the False Creek. So we're not. Do we look to Canada for other aspects of water management? Maybe. Shared water bases, good negotiations, good history with the IJC, with the United States, good capability in small private sector, some parts and pieces, forest fire impact on watersheds, some irrigation management. Should we be waking up now and getting better? Yes, I think so, because I think we could do a lot better. Okay, can I do anything? You? Yeah. If you're really interested in water, what do? Start by water is local. There is always a river keeper. You can find out what's going on with your river close to you by looking up your river keeper. Show an interest, get involved. Be a force with government authorities, saying, I don't like the way you're doing such and such. We get a few editorials on water, but not so much. Look at how you live, wash, cultivate, and above all, eat. 1.5 cubic meters of water for 1 kilogram of rice grains, 5 to 9 cubic meters, that's that much for meat. So here's what you eat and how much it costs. Almonds have had really a lot of publicity recently. I don't know why. One almond is 1.1 gallon of water. This is an American slide, obviously. But one walnut is 4.9 gallons. I have no idea why almonds are getting such a bum publicity thing. But one grape, 0.3 gallons. One head of lettuce, 3.5 gallons. A cup of coffee is, 3 to 3 liters. One head of broccoli, 5.4 gallons. You get the idea. A lot of water. So, and the more you move into protein, the more that goes up. So what you eat depends. It's the one way that you cross over with the international trade in water. Because whether you have a long shower or a short shower, if I have a long shower, Kelly's bill is going to go up because we all pay a communal bill, and Gary and Louise's. But it isn't going to help people in Tanzania if I have short showers or long showers. So you are doing an offense against your neighbors and the people that are part of the same water payment system if you overuse that resource, or if I were to water my beautiful flowers night and day. It isn't helping Tanzania or Australia or anything else. Where you do intersect is in the food market, and that's where your personal tastes actually have an intersection. So, do I have to worry? Well, it depends what you worry about. This plane went down in the East River. No, it's the Hudson.
The Hudson River.
It was the Hudson, and if you were in first class, you didn't even get your feet wet. You got, yeah, it's really quite nice there. If you're in coach class, you're already up to you're way beyond your ankles, and you're really wondering how far down it's going to go when you're standing on the wing before somebody comes along and gets you out. So We are in first class about water, there's no question about that. I guess it really depends about how we feel about the people further down in the airplane, whether we worry about it or not. So there's a number of doors open, let's talk about some of those issues.